ever been. I cannot remember the most tired I've ever been. But I can think of a really tired time. We were in Colombia. It was 2015. It was June of 2015. We'd been there for 2 years, and it was a really, really difficult 2 years. About 9 months before that, we were really excited. We've decided we had a boy and a girl, and we had a full set, and we were done. We were about to go on vacation, going to have a great time. Brittany found out she was pregnant. Right about that time, we'd sold all of the baby stuff, and we were settled in. But then we're going to Disney World, and she's pregnant, and find out right before we go, so she can't ride any of the rides and do any of that. And we're very glad to have Beckham. Don't get me wrong. We're very glad to have him. We weren't the most excited when we found out, just because we thought we were all settled. And we were having a really, really hard time. Ministry was very difficult. We'd just been abandoned by one of my friends who was supposed to help there. And Mitchell Nelson, he's an all right guy. But we'd lost him in the middle of doing this ministry. And then we found out she was pregnant, and then I had a guy call me, one of our supporting churches, says, hey, we want to come up and do a mission trip. And as great as mission trips are, and as great as that is to help a church plant, it's a ton of work. And so I was like, okay, man, you're one of our supporting churches, so I can't really tell you no, but come on up. They say, don't worry about it. We're going to take care of everything. We're going to bring everything. We're going to plan everything. We're going to do everything. And so they come up to do a Bible school for us. And I was just basically supposed to be present. I think it was the day before they got there, or the day they got there, Britt got put on bed rest. We got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old. She's on bed rest. And we've got a mission trip, and I've been at camp for multiple weeks that summer, and it was tired. A couple days after they got there, she was dealing with some blood pressure issues, and they said, Beckham is coming early. So left the mission trip, go to the hospital. She has the baby. Everything goes great. Still kind of a numb, tired moment, but we're excited. We got 5 people now. Our family won't fit at a regular-sized table. Like, this is really great. And then while we were at the hospital, Joey texts and like, hey, there's a bad storm coming in, and we're under a tornado warning, and we have to take shelter in the hospital, and I've got kids from a Bible school that are taking shelter in our building, and we've got kids from a mission trip that are taking shelter in our building, and we got all of this going on, and we've not slept. And then they finally go home, and like, this is the tiredest that I can remember being at the end of all of this. And the thing about you finish all of that up, and then you still have to keep going, right? Now you got to go home and take care of this baby and keep your other kids alive. And your wife's just had major surgery, and you got to take care of her and do all of this, and church planning and ministry, and you're tired. And the text that we're looking at today, Mark chapter 6, I can't gauge their level of tiredness, but I kind of want you to just imagine how tired, like the tiredest you've ever been, and put yourself there for the story that we're going to look at today. The apostles had been out on this mission trip. They had been traveling all over this region in pairs. They had been traveling for weeks. They weren't allowed, they obviously didn't take their cars with them, so they were walking on foot. They weren't allowed to take extra clothes. They weren't allowed to take extra money. They were just living off of whatever people gave them and wherever people let them live. And it was super exciting. Like, you're casting out demons, and you're healing people, and you're preaching, and you're doing miracles, and that's great. And God provides from moment to moment, and that's exciting every time He does that. But it's also exhausting for that constant wonder and that constant faith and that constant work. And in Mark chapter 6, verse 30, it says, the apostles returned to Jesus and told Him all that they had done and taught. I want you to pay attention to who we're talking about here. We're talking about the apostles come back to Jesus. That's the 12 that were sent out, the 12 that were called not just to follow Him, but to speak on His behalf. They came back and they told Him all He'd said. And His response to them was, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. Like, you're tired, you've been doing great ministry, you need rest. Now, we feel guilty about rest. This is not what the sermon is about today. We feel guilty about rest. Like, you sit down and you take a break, you feel like I should be more productive. Jesus' response to tired believers was, you need to take a break. You need to go rest. So if you get to the point, that you're tired and you need a break, don't think Jesus is mad at you. But Jesus says it is better for you to take a break than for you to keep going and burn yourself out. But life gets in the way. The rest of verse 31 says, for many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. They've been on this trip, and they're exhausted when they get back from this trip. And then they get back, and as soon as they get back, there's crowds there going in and out, and they're taking care of people, and they're dealing with people, and they're getting people to Jesus and away from Jesus. And there's so many people, they don't even have time to eat. And so Jesus said, we're going to go on a retreat. We're going on a ministry retreat to a place, a desolate place. Like if you're looking for, what's a desolate place? Like what would that be like in our modern times? Think of somewhere with no cell service, right? That's where I want to go, a place with no cell service. One of the reasons I like cruising is nobody can call me and nobody can text me. There's no cell service. It's a desolate place. They went away by themselves in a boat to a desolate place. And you think, this is a nice story, right? This is so nice because they're tired and Jesus recognizes that and he says, let's go on a retreat. Let's go somewhere and vacation. Of course, they're not going anywhere with air conditioning, so I don't know how restful it's going to be, but they're going away from the people. But, verse 33, many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. So they're tired. Jesus says, let's take a break because there's all these people. They get in the boat. They're going across. And the people are like, they don't need a break. I mean, all they're doing is having church. Like, it's not like it's that hard. Let's go over there and get what we need out of Jesus. Because this is fun. Like, this is enjoyable. He's taking care of our problems. So they run ahead and they meet him where they're going. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd. So Jesus gets out of the boat, and he gets out of the boat, and what do you know, if all the people aren't there, like, hey, we don't know why you moved. Like, we were all having a great time over there, but for whatever reason you moved, and we came over here so that we could all have a great time together. And Jesus said, I'm sorry, we're tired, we're closed for the day, y'all go somewhere else, we're done. We all need a break. No, he didn't. Jesus did what most people in ministry do. He had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. He didn't take the break that they needed, but he kept going because the people needed him to. Now, I just want you to kind of put yourselves in the place of the apostles here. What do you think their reaction to that was? Like, you tell me we're going on a ministry retreat because there's too many people here, and then you take me over here, and we get here, and there's people, and the first thing you do is throw us out the window. You've already said, we need rest. You've already said, we need rest, but now you're taking that away from us to serve these other people. Like, I can't read into the apostles, I don't know what they were thinking, but for me, I would be angry. Like, you're not supposed to get angry with Jesus. I would be angry with Jesus because you know I need a break, and you brought me over here to take a break, and now all of a sudden there's all these people and we're not taking a break. Jesus had compassion on them and taught, and when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, this is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. They've been talking all day, like, how do we get rid of these people? Like, when do we get to go on our trip? When do we get to take our break? How do we get rid of these people? They're like, well, surely he'll send them away in a minute. And then a few hours go by, and he's like, no, we're coming up on a good stopping spot. Like, he does this sermon a lot. Surely he's going to get to the end of this sermon, and he's going to stop, and he gets into that sermon and starts up another one. Like, okay, I know. It's dinner time. We don't have any food. Jesus is going to have compassion on them because they're hungry. He just doesn't realize what's going on. Let's sneak up and tell him, hey, we need to take a break. These people need to go get some food. This is a good stopping point right here. So they go to him. I don't know who they draw straws, and somebody gets a short straw. I don't know who it was. Somebody goes to him like, hey, great sermon, one of the best ever. Like, you're doing a really fantastic job. And who would have thought on our ministry retreat where we're not supposed to be dealing with people that you would be doing such a great job taking care of all these people. But right now, this is a really good stopping point. If you want to just why don't you just tell them to leave and go somewhere and find some food? I know there's a McDonald's 6 or 7 miles down the road. They can all go down there and wait in line. Why don't you send them to go do that so they can buy something to eat? I want you to notice something about this as we get into this. I want you to pay attention to who is talking and who he's talking to. He answered them, you give them something to eat. Which is a pretty frustrating thing for Jesus to say. He says, they need to eat, send them this food. He's like, you feed them. Like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to feed these people? How am I supposed to deal with this? And what I missed back here just a minute ago is that we switched and we went from talking about the apostles to talking about the disciples. And what's going on here is when they got back, you got the apostles as the 12 out preaching, right? And they come in and they are out preaching. They're doing these miracles. But then they get back and they join up with all the rest of the disciples. You've got people that have been following Jesus for a long time. You've got Mary Magdalene. You've got Mary, the mother of James and Joseph. You've got Mary, the mother of Jesus, that follows them sometimes. So they join back in, and now we've got this whole big crowd on this ministry retreat. And the disciples, there in verse 35, we switch from talking about the apostles to talking about the disciples. So you've got the 12 inside this group that have learned this big lesson about how God takes care of them, and then you've got all the rest. And Jesus says to them, you give them something to eat. Now, you got to ask yourself, what is Jesus doing? Because Jesus knows they don't have the food. Jesus knows they don't have the money. Jesus understands everything about this situation, but he tells them to give them something to eat. And I got to ask you for a second, what do you think Jesus is wanting from them? What does he want? They don't have the food to give. What is it that Jesus wants from these people? Have you been there? Where it feels like Jesus is telling you to do something. You're like, I don't know what you could possibly want from me in this situation. I would love to do what you tell me to do. But what am I supposed to do here? I don't have any food. What does Jesus want from them? I want to remind you that we've got two groups of people here. We got the disciples, which is all of those that follow Jesus, and then you've got 12 in the middle of this group that for weeks they have gone day after day after day with no food in their hands, no money in their hands, but every day they've been able to eat, and every day they've had a place to sleep. What is Jesus saying to them? Is he talking to all the disciples, or is he just talking to this specific group of people? He says to them, you give them something to eat. He asks them to do something that he knows is outside of their ability to do. Why? Because they have just spent weeks learning that he is able to provide for them regardless of what they have. Regardless of what they're able to do. He has done this. And the entire church did not learn this. It wasn't that everybody learned this lesson. Everybody wasn't there, but a certain group of people had been exposed to dependence upon Jesus. And I think what he's saying is he's giving these apostles that have learned from him every day an opportunity to lead, to step up. But the question is still, what are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to lead? How are they supposed to step up? They said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? There is no considered response. There's no reflection upon the lessons of the past few weeks. There is, like, you want us to spend all our money on this? You realize we quit our jobs, right? We quit our jobs to follow you. We've not worked in weeks. We've been following you around every one of us. But you want us who've made all these sacrifices already. You want us to take up a collection to provide for these people who showed up on our ministry retreat. You want us to do this. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to collect all this money and go buy them food and bring it back to feed these people. Jesus gives them an opportunity to step up and lead based on his provision. And instead, their response is frustrated sarcasm. Been there? Jesus gives you an opportunity to apply what you've learned. And you're so tired and you're so frustrated that you forget everything. Now, you know this story. This is the story of the feeding of the 5,000. You know this story. This is not new information. It's not like you've not heard this story before. And what Jesus is going to do, he's going to break up the bread, and he's going to break up the fish, and he's going to make it multiply. Does anybody here think that Jesus expected them to know that he was going to do that? No, absolutely not. This is a new thing that he's going to do. So what does he want from them? What does he want? He says, you feed them. We have no food. How are we supposed to feed them? Sarcastic response. What does he want from them? I think all he wants from them is a question. How? What are we supposed to do? You tell us what to do. We've trusted you. We've seen you provide over and over and over again. We've seen you provide. And I don't know how this is going to work out. I don't know how we're supposed to fill these people. I don't even want to be here right now. I want to be taking a nap over there on our ministry retreat. I don't want to be here right now. But if you want us to feed these people, we will do whatever you tell us to do. But tell us how. You think Jesus would have been satisfied with that response? They don't say that. They say the thing you're telling us to do is unreasonable and impossible. You're being ridiculous. How are we supposed to do this? And Jesus proceeds to teach the lesson. He said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. He said, how much food you got? Okay. None. That's how much food we've got. And he said, no, go and see how much food there is. Now, you know the end of this story, and it's supposed to be kind of a suspenseful thing, right? You're supposed to read this for the first time, and they don't mention how many people are there till the very end. But you're supposed to, like, there's a crowd of people, and it's kind of a general number. But we're told at the end of the story, and you already know the answer to this, so it's not ruining the story at all, that if there are 5,000 men plus women and children there. So let's say 10,000 people that have come from all over the place to hear Jesus preach. And he says, you feed them. And they say, we can't feed them. We don't have any food. We don't have enough money. He said, go and see. And so they go and search through the people saying, who's got food? Who's got something we can bring to Jesus to show Jesus how dumb this is, to show Jesus how impossible this is, to show Jesus that he has lost his mind on this one. Like, we're with him on most things, but this is a little crazy. We're not even supposed to be here right now. We're not supposed to be doing this. So let's find all the food. And they bring him this little boy's Minecraft lunchbox that his mom managed to pack for him. The only responsible person in the entire group of people is this one little boy. And I've got to wonder about this, because if you've seen a kid bring food around and they have freedom, they eat it immediately. So I'm thinking he doesn't even want this lunch. Otherwise, he would have already eaten it. But they go and they find out how much there is. And they bring it back and they say to Jesus, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Which in and of itself is a sarcastic response. Like, here you go, Jesus. Here's your Minecraft lunchbox. Hope you enjoy feeding everybody else out of this little bit that's not going to work. Here's what we've got to offer you, Jesus. Enjoy. They found out and said, 5 and 2 fish. He said, great. Perfect. And he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and 50s. Now, I believe that Jesus fed the 5,000 plus women and children from this little boy's Minecraft lunchbox. I believe that 100%. But I have a really hard time believing that you can tell groups of adults to sit down in groups of hundreds and 50s and they do it. Like, I've had groups of 30, and I said 6 groups of 5, and you got 3 groups of 5 and a group of 7 and a really confused group of 3. There's no way. But Jesus said, like, we're going to sit down in groups of about 50 or 100. We're going to say about, because there ain't no way they're going to do that. They sit down. And Jesus stood up in front of them, and I just kind of want you to imagine for a second the disciples. You got the apostles and disciples, but they're all together. They're like, okay, Jesus is going to feed everybody, so we want everyone to sit down in groups of 50s and 100s. Y'all spread out a little bit. We want people, like, what is Jesus going to feed us? I have no idea. Like, what are we doing right now? It's just sit down, please. I don't know what's going on. And they're feeling like fools out there, having 10,000 people sit down in groups of 50s and 100s because Jesus is about to make a fool of himself, trying to provide for all of these people out of this little bit that is here to offer. Meanwhile, the kid is crying in the corner because these big guys took his lunch, and now... And Jesus has them sit there, in a moment that would be so embarrassing for me if I'm a disciple. Because I know this doesn't work. I know there's no way this works out. Jesus is this is where it's all going to fall apart, because Jesus is going to make a fool of himself. There's no way this works. But I've got to go through the motions of having people sit down in groups of 50s and 100s on the green grass. And Jesus, as he's got 10,000 people spread out, and the disciples standing over the corner like, all right, what are you going to do now? Jesus picks up the Minecraft lunchbox. He holds up the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he looks into heaven with an inadequate meal, an inadequate solution to the problem. And he thanks God that they don't have enough. He looks and he asks a blessing. He says a blessing over something that is not enough to solve the problem. He is grateful to God over the very little that they have. And I can't do that. Like, you've called us to do this big task, and you've given us this little bit to do it with. I'm supposed to be grateful for this? I'm supposed to be grateful for the big task and the inadequate supplies? I'm supposed to be grateful, and I'm supposed to stand up here and with a straight face thank everybody, thank God for what I'm about to do to feed everybody? But Jesus looks to heaven, blesses the food, and begins to break it. He broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set them before the people. And the thing is, Jesus did not break it and say, everybody form a line. We're going to come through here and I'm going to hand it to you a piece at a time. But he broke this inadequate supply of food into pieces. And he had them gather baskets from all over the place to carry the food in. The food that was held in a Minecraft lunchbox that was not big enough for anything. He has them gather baskets. And he has his disciples sit there as he breaks bread after bread after bread and fish after fish after fish. And they watch him make the little bit that was there become enough. And then what they have to do is they have to walk around to the people that they were making sarcastic comments to about what Jesus was about to do. And they hand out the food that was not enough to all the people that were gathered together there and needed what Jesus had to offer. They go around to the groups of 50s and 100s and they pass the basket and like, well, I guess that's it. And they go back and then there's more and then there's more and there's more. And the disciples don't get to eat, right? Remember why they were there in the first place? It's because there were so many people there they didn't even have time to eat. And here they are again now with no time to eat while they're serving everyone else. He divided the bread, he gave to the disciples, and he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate. And this is just a measure of how much food he produced out of this. They all ate and were satisfied. This word satisfied means full. Right? You remember in elementary school when you'd have a pizza party and you're really excited about the pizza party? Because we're going to have a pizza party, and they show up with like one pizza, and they cut it into the smallest slices you've ever seen. You're like, this breath of pizza that I got to enjoy was really, really great. And then you got to go eat lunch afterwards. They didn't eat like that. Not everyone got a taste. But the people ate till they didn't want more. This little bit that was there was used to meet the entire need entirely. They all ate and were satisfied. And that's the disciples. That's the ones that were sarcastic to Jesus about their ministry retreat being interrupted. These are the ones who had to go around to everybody and tell everybody, you're going to sit in groups of 50s and 100s. I don't know what's about to happen here. Sit down in groups of 50s and 100s. And then they had to go around for hours passing out food over and over and over, serving this food. They went and collected all that was left. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. I want to handle these last two verses backwards, okay? I think this is pointing us back to something specific. Because you look at this story and you say, like, this has never happened before. This is a brand new thing. Except it has happened before. And the disciples all know this story about when it happened before. In 2 Kings chapter 4, there's a prophet named Elisha. And the prophet there named Elisha, he's like the chief prophet. He's the one in charge of taking care of all the others. And someone brings an offering to feed all the prophets there at the seminary, the school of the prophets that they had. And it wasn't enough food. In 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 42, it says, a man came from Baal Shalishah, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly or not, don't check it, bringing the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley and fresh ears of grain in his sack. And Elisha said, give it to the men that they may eat. This guy shows up with his offering. He's like, hey, I want to take care of the school of the prophets. I appreciate what y'all are doing. Here's some food. And Elisha's like, great, we got a lunch. Like, this is not enough. It's not enough food. He says, pass it out. But the servant said, how can I put this before 100 men? How can I do this? He repeated, give them to the men that they may eat, for thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left. So he set it before them, and they ate and had some left according to the word of the Lord. So why do I want to handle this way? It's because the reason that Jesus is doing things the way he's doing things, the reason that Mark has written this the way he's written it, is because they have seen God provide before. They have seen God take just a little bit and make it enough before. But here's the thing. You've got the prophet Elisha, great prophet. Everybody knows him. Everybody loves him. Super famous. Second only to the prophet Elijah. And that's confusing enough on its own. But Elisha was able to take a sack full of bread and a sack full of grains of wheat. And he was able to feed 100 men. But let's look at what Jesus did. Jesus fed 5,000 men. That Jesus was able to do what Elisha did, but at so much larger scale that it is not even worth comparing to. And you say, why is it that he just mentioned men? Why did you say 5,000? Because you want an impressive number. Like, why not mention men, women, and children? Like, we got them in 50s and 100s. We can count them. Let's figure this out. Why is it just mentioned? Because Mark wants us to look back at the story of Elisha, where it said it fed 100 men. But Jesus, far, far greater, was able to feed 5,000 men. They took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And that is the end of that story. And I want to ask you a question. Jesus was trying to teach them a lesson. Who was he teaching the lesson to? Was he teaching the lesson to the people that, followed him around sometime and seen some miracles? Because there's a bunch of them there. Or was he teaching the lesson to the apostles, the 12 apostles, the 12 who had just seen him provide for weeks? Who was he teaching the lesson to? Well, I'm going to say that since there were 12 baskets left, one to be handed to each of the 12 apostles who were fed by him day after day after day, I'm going to say that this lesson is for them. Because they had seen God move. They had seen God provide. And yet, when they got tired and they got hungry and they got frustrated, they forgot it all. And they decided what they had was not enough. But Jesus showed them that he doesn't need all the things in the world that we think we need to accomplish his purpose, but he only needs people who are willing to say yes and give what they have to offer. It makes sense that the other disciples who weren't there might not get this. But for those who had seen God's hand provide over and over and over, the question is, how could they not get this? How could they not be ready? Mark writes his gospel as a series of sandwiches. And I didn't have much for breakfast this morning, but I'm not just saying this because I'm hungry. He writes his gospels as a series of sandwiches. And if you paid attention to the series, you've noticed that, right? He says one thing and it's bookended by another thing, and then there's meat in the middle to help you get there. And this is no different. This starts off with the feeding of the 5,000, where they completely miss what it is that Jesus was trying to do. And this section is going to end with the feeding of the 4,000, where they have eventually learned the lesson. And in between the meat of those two pieces of bread, or in between those two pieces of bread, is the meat of the different stories that we're going to cover over the next few weeks. Next 5 weeks, actually. 4, and then we'll get to the 6th one. But today I don't want to get into the meat of all of that sandwich, the meat. Today I just kind of want to apply this to us. Just want to apply it to us, and then we'll get into what all of that's about. We'll come into what they were supposed to learn and all of that. But you have got a group of people that know the Bible well enough to know that God has done this before. And you've got a group of people who have walked with nothing, with no bag, no clothes, no food for weeks, and been provided for. And yet, for some reason, they are not able to trust Him. They are not able to understand. They are not able to get it when He puts them in a situation to apply everything that they have learned this far. And while the disciples, not the apostles, but the disciples may have had an excuse, I think we are in the boat of the apostles more than we are in the boat of the disciples. Because they don't know what's coming. They don't know about the feeding of the 5,000 when this story happens. They don't know about the feeding of the 4,000 that's going to come later. They don't know about Jesus bringing people back from the dead. You know, maybe they've seen that a little bit so far, but He's going to bring people back from the dead after this. They don't know about all the things that He's done. They don't know that He's going to allow Himself to be delivered to the cross, die, and 3 days later come back to life. They don't know about the Holy Spirit empowering the church to go out and do the work of ministry for years after that. They don't know about all the things that we know. They don't know that Christianity is going to persevere for 2,000 years and change the face of the world, change society, change culture, and that billions will come to know Him. They don't know that. But we do. We know His power. We know who He is. And they still had questions. So when He says this lesson is for the 12 apostles, the 12 who had seen it, and not for the disciples who were unfamiliar and have an excuse not to understand this, I'm going to put us in the camp of the apostles, not because we're apostles, not because we have the same authority, but because we have the same information that they do. And we have seen God provide. We have seen God move. We have seen God work. And yet we will have the same reaction when He gives us a task that we decide is too big for what we have to offer. The question that has to be asked at the end of this story about the apostles, the question that Jesus is putting to the apostles is, do they trust Him? Like, yeah, absolutely, I trust you. I trust you enough to go where you tell me to go. I trust you enough to trust in you for my salvation. I trust in you enough to agree with you about your interpretation of Scripture. But do you trust Him enough to obey Him? And they say, some? A little? And we have to ask ourselves the same question. You trust Him enough for your salvation. You trust Him to take care of you. You trust Him when you pray to Him. You trust Him enough to show up to church. You trust Him enough to teach your kids the Bible. But do you trust Him enough to obey Him even when what He is asking you to do seems crazy? And if you don't trust Him enough to do that, then do you trust Him at all? If Jesus says to you, I want you to share the gospel with that person, what's your response? Well, you know, Jesus, I definitely see that they need the gospel shared with them, and I definitely see that they could use that. It'd be good for them. But all I've got is this little lunchbox, and it's really not enough to accomplish the task that I have there. Like, I'm going to mess it up. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I don't have enough to offer. All I've got is this bread and this fish, and it's enough for some things. Like, it can get by, but I'm really not equipped for this task. So it would be great if you could get somebody else who is equipped for that task and let them do it. Because you've made a pretty bad choice here, and you should reevaluate that. We say, yeah, that's nobody would ever do that. Yeah, nobody would ever do that. Nobody would ever know that God is telling them to share the gospel with somebody and say, no, I don't have enough. I'm not enough. I don't have the words. I'm going to mess it up. But what if the lesson that Jesus wants you to learn from this is that it's not about you being enough. It's not about you having enough. It's not about you being skilled, but about you trusting Him enough to obey. And what do you know if He doesn't take the little bit that you have to offer that is inadequate for the task and making it enough? You say, I can't share the gospel because I just can't do that. I just don't have enough. It's too big of a job for what I have to offer. You want me to work in the nursery? I'll work in the nursery. I'll do that. As long as it's not too often. I'll work in the nursery and do that. But I just don't have enough for this task. The disciples said, how are we supposed to feed all these people? We don't have enough to feed all these people. And Jesus said, what do you have? And they said, we got a little bit of fish, and we got a little bit of bread, and we had to take that from this kid. And He said, great. And what they had to offer was enough. Not because it was enough on their own, but because He doesn't need it to be enough. He can make it enough. So when Jesus asks you to give the gospel to somebody, you don't say, I can't do it, I'm the wrong person, I don't have enough to offer, I don't know enough. You give the gospel and trust Him to make it enough. And you want to know something? When God tells you to share the gospel, the Spirit of God leads you to share the gospel with somebody, and you say, you know what, this is a really bad idea. I don't have enough, I'm the wrong person, I'm inadequate, but I'm going to do it anyway because you told me to. You want to know something? If it doesn't work out, if it's not enough, you know whose fault it is? His. If He can't make it enough, it's His fault. And you get to look at Him and say, see? Jonah, one of my favorite series to preach is through Jonah. We did that back a while ago. Jonah got eaten by the whale. He got spit out by the whale. He finally went back to Nineveh to preach. And he preached the most hateful, short sermon to those people. He walked around that city and said, Lord's going to destroy the city in 40 days. Hope you're ready. I think that was exactly what he said. It's been a while since I looked at that. He said, he preached a 4-word message, and it was, all of this is going to end. And then he was so surprised and angry because God took the little bit he was willing to give and used it to turn an entire city of people back to God. You say, I don't have enough. Jesus says, give me what you have. He says to give love to people. You say, you don't understand how that person has hurt me. You don't understand how that person has hurt me. I can't give them love. I can't give them forgiveness. I can't extend grace to them because they've hurt me too much. I don't have enough love and grace to extend to that person. You don't understand my family background. My family, we don't do the love thing. We don't do all that. If you need me to give them a pat on the back, I can do that. But I don't have love to give to that person. I can't show that person love. You don't understand how my family interacts. You don't understand how we do things. I can't give that love. It's not enough. I get my wife to do it. She loves to love. She can go give that person love. It'll be great. But when God says to you, extend love to your neighbor, extend grace to your neighbor, extend forgiveness to your neighbor, and you say, my love is not enough. I don't have enough. You're making the same mistake the apostles did. Jesus says, why don't you trust me to know what I'm talking about and do what I told you to? And again, if you extend that love to that person and it's not enough, it's his fault. But if you extend the love that he's telling you to extend to someone, it's not going to fall short. Because he didn't choose you because he didn't know what it was that you had to offer. He's like, man, I didn't realize how messed up you were. There's no way. If I'd realized how messed up you were, I never would have asked you. Jesus says to give your money. Share your wealth. You say, I don't have enough. I ain't got enough. Barely getting by. I don't have enough. You say, it's my money. I work for it. They don't need it. I'm not giving it. You say, what I have to give, I'm willing to give, but what difference is it even going to make? Because the need is so big. And what I have to contribute is so small. Why should I even do it? It's not even a drop in the bucket compared to the need. But Jesus says, give, you give. And allow Him to make it enough. He says, give yourself to ministry. And I'm not talking about quitting your job to go to seminary and become a preacher. I'm talking about getting involved into this church in a way that is not just showing up and cleaning sometimes or showing up and working in the nursery, but dedicating yourself to teaching others, to discipling others, to raising others up, to crying with other people, to rejoicing with other people, to give yourself to this ministry, not to be a spectator to ministry, but to be a participant in a ministry, a provider of ministry. And you say, I'm the wrong person for that. You don't know where I've been. You don't know where I've done. You don't know how little I have to offer anybody else. What I know is that Jesus was able to take the fish and the bread and make it enough for whatever needed to be done. And if He's calling you and you say, I'm inadequate, that is simply an opportunity for Him to show how great He is, that He could use you to accomplish a big task when you are as small as you are. Give yourself, regardless of what you think about yourself. Guys, this week was a really tough week. Really hard week. And I struggled this week. And you know something? I didn't want to preach today. I didn't want to get up here. Because I don't feel like I have anything to offer you right now. I feel like I'm pouring from an empty cup today. But you know what Jesus said? He said, get up and preach. And it might not be the best meal you've ever had, but I did what Jesus said to do, and His Spirit will do the work that needs to be done, regardless of what I have to offer you. You say you're not enough, you are correct. But He can take the little and use it to meet the need. Finally, you need to give yourself to Him, because He says to me, come all who are meek and lowly, come all those who are sinners, all those who are broken, all those in need of rescue, come to me and I will give you rest. I will rescue. I will save you from your sin and from hell and death. And you say, no, you don't understand what I have done and where I have been. You don't understand. There's not enough grace to rescue me. And He says, I didn't say, come all of you who have got it pretty well together. He doesn't say, come all of you who have done pretty well, made some mistakes, but done pretty well most of the time. He said, I said, come all the broken. Because He came to save us. He came to die for us while we were still His enemies, while we were still in the middle of sinning. And I want you to think about this just a little bit. He died 2,000 years before I was born. I hadn't even tried yet. I had not even tried to do well yet. I had not even tried to resist sin yet. All of my sin that I would ever commit was in front of Him, would take place after He forgave me. And yet He died for me anyway. And you resist and you say, I can't because it's not enough. There's not enough. I'm not enough. And He says, stop trying to decide what's enough and do what I say. Do you trust me? I trust you to be right. I trust you to, take care of me. I trust you to answer my prayers. I trust that you're right about the Bible. Do you trust me enough to obey me? I want you to understand something. Jesus did not take the bread and the fish and turn it into ribeye and fried squash, which is by far the best meal. He didn't do that. It was still the quality of food that it was when it started. And just because Jesus is going to make it enough, just because He's going to use what you've got to offer, doesn't mean that it's going to get better. That He's going to take it and He's going to make it better. But what He does is He takes it and makes it enough. It may be spreading your brokenness and your inadequacy all over the place. But it will still be used to accomplish His purpose. And that's what we are. A group of broken, inadequate people that turn ourselves over to Him to allow Him to make us enough to do what it is that He wants to do. And that means that we as a church are still going to be fish and bread. It doesn't mean that because of that we are transformed into something that was somehow magically better than it was before. It means we are going to make mistakes. It means that we're going to have to show each other grace. It means that sometimes I'm going to forget where I am when I'm preaching. It means that sometimes the praise team is going to have a rough day. It means that sometimes our nursery workers and our kids workers are going to have a rough time. But what it also means is that He will take it and use it to be enough. Stop deciding that you know better than Jesus. Stop deciding that what He has called you to is a mistake. And answer this question. Do you trust Him or not? Now I'm going to skip ahead. The cool thing about the story of the 4,000, when He fed the 4,000 later on in a couple of chapters, Jesus doesn't wait for them to say, hey, dismiss these people all and send them away. He's there preaching, and He's got the 4,000 gathered up there, and He says, y'all think we should feed these people? And they said, whatever you think, man. I'm not going to get into it with you. Yeah, if you want to do that. They said, this is what we've got. This is what we've got. By the time we get done with this sandwich, the disciples will have learned to trust Him and not to put limits on Him. And I hope you get there too. But before we get there, I just want to leave you with this today. Is there something that you know He wants you to do that you're choosing not to do because you think your judgment is better than His? And if so, what are you going to do about that today? Our Heavenly Father, we come before You today, Lord, and I ask that You would make the little that I have to offer right now enough. I ask that Your Spirit would move and provide, that Your Spirit would speak to these people individually, that You would speak to me, and that You would apply this message to our hearts, Lord, because I know that we are no better than the apostles. I know that we look at the little that we have and the enormity of the task that You've called us to, and we say there's no reason to even try because we can never be enough. And I ask that You would speak to us today, that You would show us that it's not about us being enough, but about trusting You enough to allow You to make us enough. That Your Spirit would move and work, that we would see the task that You place before us, and that we would obey where You call us to, that we would serve where You call us to. And if there's any here today that says, you know what, you don't understand my situation, you don't understand how bad I am, you don't understand the sin that I've committed, that they would look at this story today and understand that You are able to take what is worthless. You are able to take one lunch for 10,000 people, and You are able to do everything that needs to be done to satisfy. That You died long before any of the sins they're concerned about today were committed, and You extended forgiveness long before their grandparents started sinning. And that You didn't extend that in the hope that they would be better, but You extended that knowing the exact situation where they would be today. And if there's one that is not trusting You to rescue them, to save them, to forgive them, Lord, I ask that today that they would see how foolish they're being. And that You are standing ready to make the little bit that they have enough. That You are willing to fill the gaps, that You are willing to rescue and forgive and save the moment they're willing to trust You. Lord, please stretch us and make us enough for the task that You've called us to here in this place and in this time. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Would you stand?